Okay, so we don't have a card to preview, and we wouldn't have even close to enough time to preview a card if we did, but we wanted to look back at a very really cool card that happened actually as we're recording. It was 13 years ago today, August 9th, UFC 87 Seek and Destroy. This is actually one of the very first cards that I purchased, believe it or not, since like the first five. Because it wasn't for GSP, actually, it was for Lesnar. But it was also, believe it or not, and you probably don't believe it, but I swear to God, it's true. It was for Jason McDonald, because I had watched the Tito Shamrock fight, and he was on the undercard of that. And I just kind of made up my mind. This guy's Canadian and he looked good, and I'm going to follow this guy. So he's fighting on pay-per-view, and then Brock's also fighting. So it's like, okay, I'm buying this card. And it was it did 625,000 buys, which might be the lowest for a Brock Lesnar pay-per-view, but he wasn't in the main event. Main event was Georges St-Pierre and John Fitch defending the title. This was Minneapolis Target Center. Ryan, you're going to know way more about this card because I was such a newbie at the time, but holy shit, there's a lot of big names on this card. Besides the main card.
This is why I wanted to talk about it, because when you look at this card, it was... When you look at the history of the UFC, you have three of the biggest stars in UFC history on the card. Yeah, you have GSP in the main event, it was at the time where he was starting his run as the greatest welterweight of all time. Just absolute dominant performance. Over John Fitch, just destroyed Fitch throughout 5 rounds. And then after this fight, he went on to fight BJ Penn, and that's when his kind of like legacy as being one of the big drawing cards, it kind of almost was solidified with this fight, but the BJ Penn fight was the one that put him over the top. Here you had Brock Lesnar, who originally was supposed to fight Mark Coleman on the show, a UFC Hall of Famer. It was supposed to be Mark Coleman's return, and boy, I mean, Mark Coleman probably would have got massacred by Brock Lesnar, but Lesnar fought Heath Herring, which was a legitimate fight at the time, and Lesnar looked good, dominant win, cut a post-fight promo, and then after this fight, he went on to fight for the UFC heavyweight title. The third on this was an unknown fighter on the prelims from New York in his 4th or 5th career fight, who had a funky nickname of Bones. Nobody knew who this guy was.
Seven.
And just 7th fight. Yeah, it was still early in his career. He had been fighting for not even a year at the time.
A year and a half.
Yeah, maybe a year. Yeah, at the time, it was this absolutely 6'4", 205-pound light heavyweight who showed flashes of brilliance, but you could see a lot of talent there. John Jones, first UFC fight, and we all know the story of John Jones. He's got that BS loss to Matt Hamill on his record, but this is a guy who's never been beaten in his career, and take out everything all the craziness and everything does. This is arguably the most talented fighter in UFC history. So, I mean, I just wanted to talk about that card a bit. When you kind of look back 13 years ago today, like, you legit had 3 of the biggest stars in UFC history on the same card, but one of them was in his UFC debut, and here he is 13 years later, still arguably the best fighter in the promotion.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Matt Hamill fight, and really it was like not even a year and a half later. Like, he's in a prelim here and nobody knows who he is, and a year and a half later he's in the main event of the Tough 10 finale. I think it was the main event, right? The co-main. But, he had beaten, I think most people probably, he kind of got on their radar when he beat Stephan Bonner on UFC 94, which is the undercard also of the St-Pierre Penn fight you talked about. And then at UFC 100, which, was pretty much the biggest card of all time up until, for years, that was the biggest card of all time. And he got a win there on the prelims that they, I think, probably showed on the main card. So that's where people would have kind of, oh wow, this is a guy to look out for. So
I mean,
we also had Ben Saunders on that card, fought in the opener. You know,
yeah, I really wanted to highlight it about these three because, like I said, you look at John Jones.
I know.
John Jones, like,
but there's a lot of names.
2.5 years later, John Jones was light heavyweight champion. 2.5 years later, it's crazy how fast his rise happened, you know. So.
Oh yeah, and he was so young and like just star potential all over him. I mean, you know, and nobody really knew about kind of the other stuff going on with him. I mean, some people did, you probably did, but I mean, most people didn't, you know, realize, you know, what was going on behind the scenes with him. But, you know, despite all that, I mean, you know, he's literally gone on to have, you know, probably the best in cage career of any fighter in UFC history. You know, some of the other names, you know, Damian Maia, you know, beat my guy Jason McDonald. We had Kenny Florian, you know, who was I guess former champion by this time.
No, he's never
beating Roger. He's never he's title contender though. Yeah. Fought Roger Huerta. You know, Rob Emerson and Manny Gamburian. Gamburian, you know, was a fighter for a long time. And you had Brock Lesnar in the co-main event in his second UFC fight after losing to Frank Mir in his UFC debut, and then, you know, they put him right into a title fight with Randy Couture, which, you know, obviously there's business reasons why you do that, and nobody. I mean, I'm sure, again, you know, like I'm a newbie at this time, and I'm from pro wrestling, and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, but I'm sure people must have just been up in arms about Lesnar going for the title like 4 months after this, you know, after getting a decision over Heath Herring. Was it one of those things where, yeah, you know, like everyone knew it was a joke, but, you know, you have to because it's Brock Lesnar and it's the right business thing?
Yeah, I mean, people who know better knew the circumstances, you know, and also at the time it was Randy Couture was still in a legal battle with the UFC, and they had already announced an interim title fight with Mir and Nogueira, so they kind of had to dangle this fight to get Couture back and get their actual heavyweight title back. So that's how they set up that big fight at UFC 100, right? Because Mir was the interim champion and Lesnar was the linear champion, or the undisputed or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, and they fought each other for the unified title, right? Things had to work out. I mean, at that time, Lesnar beating Couture wasn't really much of an upset.
No.
Upset. I mean, there was still a lot of people that thought Randy Couture was going to win that fight, which at that time, I didn't think he was going to. The Mir beating Nogueira, you know, that was an upset. I mean, the stars had to align for that rematch.
That was
to
a
happen,
pleasant surprise, right?
Yeah, that was, you know.
I mean, because Lesnar might not have beaten Nogueira.
Yeah, I think he would. At that time, I think he would have beaten Nogueira. Nogueira
would have been tough, though.
Nogueira was on the start of his decline, so.
Was he?
So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking back to, you know, like Pride Nogueira, but again, I'm not. I wasn't. I probably couldn't have picked Nogueira out of a police lineup at this time.
Nogueira got old right before the Mir fight. He was beat up. He was beat up badly going into that Mir fight, but it was still an upset, you know, at the time. So
yeah. So that show did 625,000 buys, you know, sold out the Target Center, $2.25 million gate, you know, big show for UFC. And this was kind of, I mean, this kicked off like a really, really nice run for them for like a good 2.5 years where, you know, they were just doing killer business, and, you know, made some really, really big stars. So yeah, big important fight 13 years ago. It's funny because like when you think it's 13 years ago, someone else posted today in our group about the Chris Jericho promo in Chicago, and that was 22 years ago. And in some ways, like, the Lesnar fighting in UFC feels longer ago, you know, in some ways, but then in other ways, like 13 years isn't even that long. Like, I bet you if you pull up a WWE card from like 2008, there's probably like half the guys that are still on the show. So, you know, meanwhile in this one, you know, most of these guys are retired. John Jones was just starting and he's still in his prime, but just about everyone else on that card is pretty much done. Damian Maia is still around, but he's, you know, just about done. So yeah, that's UFC 87. So check it out. It's on UFC Fight Pass or ESPN Plus, I guess. Is it? Do they have the archives on there on ESPN Plus, or is it all UFC Fight Pass? You gotta get them in the States.
Definitely on Fight Pass. So
okay, yeah, definitely on Fight Pass. I might watch that one this weekend if I'm bored.